Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Content Patch for the 25th of July 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, original Madden programmer successfully sues EA for $11 million. Hotline Miami dev says there will not be an iOS release of the title. Microsoft confirms that the retail price of its first-party Xbox One games in the UK will be £50. And new Xbox One features have been revealed during the Comic-Con panel in San Diego. All this NeoC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Robin Antonick was the original programmer of Madden. It was, of course, released in 1988 for MS-DOS, Apple II, and Commodore platforms. Since then, of course, it has become a massive franchise for EA Sports. However, it would appear that the original programmer wasn't that happy. He sued EA in 2011 for supposedly millions of dollars of unpaid royalties. He claimed that the contract he signed with EA in 1986 stipulated that he should be paid royalties not only for the games he developed, but any derivative works of those games. Now, what's actually happened is that it's been ruled the games between 1990, and you're gonna love this, and 1996 were virtually identical to Antonick's original version of Madden. That means that they are being counted as derivative works of the title. This is kind of hilarious, I'm gonna say. Oh man, for all the times we've said they just keep releasing the same game over and over again, it seems that now legally that's exactly what they ended up doing, which is kind of funny. Obviously, these sports games are very much iterative, yeah? They're built on top of each other, but it seems that the court believes they are so iterative and so similar that yes, actually under the contract, this guy was very much entitled to that particular payment. And if that's not enough, there's actually going to be more. Yes, I kid ye not, they're going to be doing another phase of the trial, which is going to be focusing on the 3D games, basically between 1997 and the present. Good lord. I mean, if they manage to get royalties from that, then he's going to be owed an absolute fortune. It's going to be absolutely ridiculous. It raises a lot of very interesting questions. The attorney for the case, Rob Carey, said that the jury uniformly rejected the idea that this game was developed without Robin's work. That is really interesting, isn't it? Because I have a feeling that there's an awful lot of games that would qualify like this, but I also have the feeling that most companies wouldn't be silly enough to sign a contract that says, yes, you're also going to be paid royalties for derivative works. That is... Why would you sign a contract like that? I mean, let's be honest, it was in 1986 that this was actually signed, so it may very well have been a time when EA actually wasn't crazy and didn't think about everything as a franchise. I think that seems like the most likely thing. I mean, they'd only been in business for 4 years by that point. They were founded in 1982, so they were a much, much smaller company at that stage. So I think it just seems like it was a mistake on their part. But at the end of the day, if that's what he's entitled to, then that is what he's entitled to. And if EA has been repeatedly saying, look, we're not going to pay you, then this is exactly what was required to happen. I would imagine that EA is just a little bit more sensible with its contracts these days, just to make sure that doesn't happen, considering a lot of their titles could very easily fall under this particular requirement. This doesn't open the floodgates for anything, let's be entirely frank. I think that, for the most part, in these situations, you would get the similar ruling regardless. And I can only imagine this is a fairly rare situation. If they just paid up in the first place, then none of this bollocks would have happened, would it? The developers of Hotline Miami have confirmed that they will not be releasing an iOS version of the title. The reason being, quite simply, no, controls would suck. It's pretty much all you need to know in that particular respect. A couple of users commented that they would like to see it anyway, considering that there is native controller support in iOS 7. Interesting idea, isn't it? Well, you've got controller support in iOS 7, so is it okay to release a game that by default has terrible controls, as long as you can use a controller to actually play it? And I think the answer you're probably going to find from most developers is no, it isn't. You're also not going to sell many copies that way. The fact of the matter is that if you require a controller for an iOS title, you are not going to do all that well. As much as I hate on-screen controls, the fact of the matter is if you're going to develop for that system, then you have to accept that this is a thing. That you have to make your controls suitable for a touchscreen. And if you don't think that you can do that, then you shouldn't release your game at all, which is exactly what he said. Good. You know, well done to him. That is exactly what I would have said if this was my game. I will not provide an inferior experience for people just because I want to make a bit more money. And it's not acceptable to release the title on this system and then say, oh yeah, you need a controller for it. By default, it should control well. It's the same situation that we have on PC. It's like saying, oh, well, you shouldn't buy this game unless you have this very specific device in order to control the damn thing with. I think controllers are far more common on PC. I would say that most PC gamers probably own one in some respect because they know the reality of the situation is that you do have to use them for certain games. But this is way beyond that. Yeah? You've got millions upon millions of iOS users, and they don't own controllers because up until iOS 7, there was no native support for it. The controllers that do exist for iOS devices basically emulate keyboard inputs, and the games have to be coded specifically to recognize that. If you play something on an iCade, for instance, that's what happens. And it's nowhere near ideal, because you don't get any analog control whatsoever. In a game that requires the kind of precision that Hotline Miami does, I think it's utterly unacceptable to release it on iOS, and I'm glad that the developer agrees with me on that one. Even if you could say, no, it's fine, you just buy a controller, otherwise don't play it. Well, what's the point in even porting it then? 99.9% of your users are not going to be able to play that game properly. Even if controllers are widely adopted, I still don't expect all that many games to need them. It seems unlikely. Even if you get a controller for, say, an iPad, that means you can't play it on a bus, or you can't play it on a plane. It's too inconvenient to do that. You want to be able to hold this device in your hands. Unless you use something like a game clip, and good luck using that with an iPad, it's way too large, or of course a Moga controller, which are both for Android devices, you don't have the ability to hold the smartphone or tablet and also use a controller at the same time. It just doesn't work that way. So yeah, that's just a situation you're going to be in. If you want to play proper games, you shouldn't be buying them on iOS. That's kind of the reality of it. You can play strategy games, turn-based stuff works pretty well, point-and-clicks work pretty well, there's a couple of other genres, but Hotline Miami, not even a hope. Admittedly, that hasn't stopped other developers from porting their games to iOS and have them handle like absolute rubbish, but I am glad that these guys actually have some standards. It's nice to see. Microsoft has confirmed that their first-party titles in the UK will be set at a recommended retail price of £50. This is pretty much around the same price that they were on the launch of Xbox 360. Each of the games there were also about 50 quid. Please bear in mind, when doing the translation to dollars, before you scream about it, that also includes a VAT price of 20%. Value-added tax is applied to everything in the UK. So, in reality, they end up being about $4 or $5 more expensive than you would find in the US at current exchange rates. But that stuff does have a tendency to change. So, these titles include Dead Rising 3, Forza 5, Connect Sports Rivals, and Rise Son of Rome. It would also appear that the claim that EA titles would cost £55 each may not necessarily have been accurate, with Amazon pricing Need for Speed Rivals, an EA title, currently at £43.99. Now, if it were undercutting, then it would be undercutting in a pretty major way. I would imagine that the profit margin would disappear at that stage, and that would end up being a loss leader if, in fact, it was a recommended retail price of £55. We should, of course, bear in mind that most retailers do not make huge bank from selling new games. The margin on them is quite small, and there's an awful lot of competition on launch day between them. So you often have a situation where they will actually make next to nothing on the titles. They just want people to get in the store and maybe buy something else. Frankly, for a next-gen platform, I don't necessarily have a problem with 50 quid titles, but of course we should compare that to the fact that if you want to get the same kind of games on PC, you're probably going to pay £30 to £35. Prices do have a tendency to sort of slip over the console's lifespan, not by a huge amount, but they tend to go down just a little bit. Stuff like The Last of Us did not, in fact, sell for £50 on launch. You saw it closer to between 40 and 45, depending on where you went. New pre-orders over on game.co.uk will set you back about £44.99 for titles like Splinter Cell Blacklist, with a pre-order price of GTA 5 being £40.99. So there is definitely a lot of competition and a lot of variance towards the end of this console's lifespan, and this is around the same price that we were seeing games on the Xbox 360 around launch. So at least there isn't a gigantic jump. I think it's safe to say that. And finally, at the Xbox One panel at Comic-Con, several new features for the Xbox One have been revealed. So we're going to be taking a look at a few of those. So I discussed yesterday the ability to record the last 5 minutes of gameplay. In addition to that, the Kinect will recognize the command Xbox Record, which will be an instruction to record a 30-second clip. Now, that of course isn't really all that exciting, especially considering that the PlayStation 4 records significantly more than that, so I imagine they're probably gonna up that before the release comes out so that it's about on par with the PlayStation. However, what we do know is that the console features controller recognition with the Kinect camera. So what it looks at is who's holding which controller, and if you happen to swap the controller around, it will detect who picks it up and will automatically switch a control scheme for that new user if you happen to map your controls that way. So let's say you have two controllers, you've got a bunch of guys around playing Killer Instinct, you end up playing King of the Hill, you hand your controller over to somebody else, it automatically detects who that is and what their control scheme is. That is, of course, assuming that you've set that up in the first place. So, seems a bit fiddly initially to set all of that stuff up, and I think it's got limited use, but it's a nice option nonetheless. You will not have to go to the options screen at all, it's all fully automatic, supposedly. Probably the most interesting and useful information that came out was that the Kinect now only requires a meter range in order to actually work. The original Kinect required a fairly large room in order to work effectively. However, this one's minimum range is now 1 meter, so that's good. It will also detect individual finger movements up to about 3 meters. Not really sure what the usefulness of that would be. And it will scan and create a full 3D image of your face, which can be applied to your avatar, and it'll also detect how fat you are and make your avatar as fat as you. That's kind of cute. Yeah, it detects your body mass indicator, and it adjusts the size of your avatar accordingly. Oh, lordy, lordy. A lot of interesting little gimmicks, but not all that much practicality, right? I think maybe the most important thing about that has got to be that range, and honestly, if you're gonna force everyone to have a Kinect, then at least make sure that people can actually use it for useful things. As much as I hate the fact that the Kinect is coming with this thing, and is pushing the price up, and that, you know, it's looking at you all the time, and that Microsoft can't be trusted with your data, and that Microsoft has already revealed data to the NSA, and you get the idea. If we ignore all of those horrible things, then the one advantage you can say about everyone having a Kinect is that games can have that functionality built in because you know everybody's got it. And what we might end up getting is a situation like we'd hoped with the original Kinect, where it would not in fact be used for nonsense controller stuff, as in using your body as a controller. It would be used for interesting ancillary things, like you turn your head and the camera turns, the ability to do a couple of gestures that might be useful, basically do gestures instead of pressing buttons, which might be handy in certain situations, and of course, more integration of voice commands in a way that actually works well and is responsive. That's what I would hope for with this, if I were to look at only the positives of it. And the fact that it can work now in a much smaller room means that this stuff should be focused upon, I would hope. However, I can pretty much guarantee that what's going to end up happening with the damn thing is there'll be a couple of years worth of nonsense gimmicks with it until people actually figure out how to use it properly to enhance the current gaming experience. That's the thing with Kinect. That's what it should have done. Enhanced the current gaming experience, not replaced it. Yeah? Don't replace the controller, enhance what you can do with it. That's the best option when it comes to something like this, but unfortunately that is not what the original Kinect actually did. So there you go. Alright folks, that wraps me up for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day, if you do not mind, and if you do mind, well, tough. Staying on the rather chilled out theme that we started yesterday, I'd like to give you a track by Maze Dude, something from Lemmings. Such a long time since we've had a good Lemmings title. Probably for the best, because they're damn frustrating. Whatever the case, this goes by the name of Lounge Lemmings. Medley of various Lemmings-themed tracks. It was actually released 11 years ago now, this particular track. That's not as old as Lemmings, which came out in 1994. Good lord. Alright, we're probably due another Lemmings game. We're certainly due another Lemmings remix. So here you go, something nice and chilled out, relaxed from Maze Dude. Thank you very much for watching, folks. And make sure to check out my Shadowrun Returns video that was released last night at midnight when the embargo lifted. You may have missed it in your sub box. I'll see you next time.